entered and executed a system of justice against La Casa Nostra, to include the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families.
A quiet Florida suburb, children walking to school, a man watering his lawn, a couple loading groceries into their car. Nothing unusual until federal agents suddenly swarm the street guns drawn ordering a 63-year-old offender to the ground. Neighbors stare stunned. How many dangerous criminals were living right beside ordinary families without anyone knowing? How did men with final deportation orders, some issued more than a decade ago, manage to blend into daily life as if nothing had ever happened? For 10 days in late October and early November 2025, this question haunted every Florida community. What emerged was a chilling reality. More than 230 offenders, including 54 convicted predators, had been hiding in plain sight, shopping in local stores, visiting parks, living near schools.
Eliminate and eradicate entire drug trafficking networks. We're going to clean out whole neighborhoods, and we're going to return these neighborhoods to...
These weren't low-level offenders. They were individuals with long arrest histories, some spanning decades linked to abuse cases, violent assaults, and even homicide. According to reporting from Reuters and The Guardian, U.S. authorities have increasingly warned that gaps in enforcement during the early 2020s allowed criminal networks and repeat offenders to exploit overstretched immigration systems, slipping through local custody rules and federal bureaucracy. The event began unfolding on October 25, 2025, when ICE initiated what it formally labeled Operation Criminal Return. The objective was simple on paper, yet monumental in execution: locate and detain dangerous offenders who had completed their prison sentences, been given final deportation orders, and then disappeared into neighborhoods across all 67 Florida counties. What made this operation extraordinary was not only the number of arrests, but the staggering length of time many suspects had avoided removal. Some had deportation orders dating back more than 10 years. Others had been arrested repeatedly 10 times, 12 times, even 19 times, yet stayed free because previous enforcement priorities deprioritized their cases. Local sheriffs had complained for years about offenders slipping through federal cracks, a concern echoed in earlier analyses by DW and BBC News, which highlighted national inconsistencies in post-release monitoring. Under President Donald Trump, however, the recalibration of enforcement priorities changed the landscape. Federal officials described Operation Dirtbag as a targeted sweep designed to restore public trust and reinforce the perception of an America reasserting control over its internal security posture. As Defense News noted in recent coverage, Trump's administration has emphasized deterrence through visibility, whether in homeland security operations, border policy, or overseas military posture. Key developments emerged quickly. Teams discovered predators living near daycares, repeat offenders residing in large apartment blocks, registered criminals working casual construction jobs without supervision. Some suspects had even failed to report address changes for years. The scale of these lapses shocked even veteran investigators. The strategic implications reached far beyond Florida. If one state, despite its aggressive 2025 expansion of enforcement programs, still had more than 200 high-risk absconders in its communities, what did that mean for national readiness? Could similar networks exist in Texas, California, or New York? Analysts from Janes have warned that internal vulnerabilities can undermine a nation's broader security posture, weakening confidence among allies and emboldening adversaries. Domestic enforcement failures, they argue, can become geopolitical liabilities. Yet at the heart of this operation lies a human story. Families who had no idea a convicted predator lived next door. Parents shocked to learn someone with a 19 arrest record had been walking past playgrounds. Communities relieved yet shaken by how easily trust can be violated. The state now faces a deeper question. If more than 230 dangerous offenders lived unnoticed in one region, how many remain hidden across the nation, and what must be done to prevent the next breach? The operation's most disturbing discoveries were not the sheer number of arrests, but the stories behind the names individuals who had slipped through every layer of the system and continued living ordinary lives while carrying criminal histories that should have triggered immediate action years earlier. The question that now hangs over Florida is chilling. How did so many predators remain embedded in communities long after courts ordered them removed? One of the most alarming cases was Sergio Velázquez Carnero, a 63-year-old Cuban national whose record reads like a catalog of violations that should have guaranteed permanent removal. His convictions included lewd and lascivious assault on a child contributing to the delinquency of a minor and repeated violations of offender registration rules. An immigration judge had ordered him removed in 2017, yet he remained in Florida for 8 additional years, residing near families who had no idea about his past. Even more concerning, he had been living in a county that, according to recent BBC and Al Jazeera data, ranks among Florida's fastest growing suburban regions filled with new schools, housing developments, and young families. Another case unearthed by Operation Dirtbag involved Frank Rene Gachita Borges, age 51. Convicted of lewd and lascivious abuse and sentenced to 4 years in prison, he completed his sentence and received a removal order in March 2022. But 3.5 years later, he was still living, freely moving through Miami neighborhoods as if nothing had happened. Even as population density grew and as Reuters and The Guardian highlighted rising concerns about unmonitored offenders in major U.S. metro areas, he remained unaccounted for until federal agents finally caught up with him. Some profiles were even more staggering. One suspect had been arrested 19 times with charges ranging from homicide and kidnapping to assault on law enforcement officers. Another had been arrested 10 times before this operation finally removed him from public spaces. The cumulative pattern is unmistakable. These were not one-time offenders. These were individuals who had cycled through the justice system repeatedly, each time slipping back into the shadows. The case of Vladimir Garcia, a 48-year-old Cuban national, offers a disturbing example of this recurring pattern. His record included grand theft, auto burglary, tools, multiple resisting arrest incidents, and a conviction for lewd and lascivious battery involving a minor between 12 and 15 years old. Garcia's offenses spanned years, crisscrossing jurisdictions and exposing gaps in coordination between local and federal systems. His continued presence in Florida underscores what DW previously described as structural blind spots in offender tracking across state lines. Then there was Saturnino Duran, age 69, with a removal order dating back to July 2020. His crimes included assault, attempted premeditated murder, and drug-related offenses. For more than 5 years, he remained in the country, living quietly in a Florida community despite a criminal record that should have made his location a top priority. Yet he remained unmonitored, untracked, and unnoticed until Operation Dirtbag forced an overdue reckoning. Under President Trump's security-first doctrine, reinforced by recent defense news and Jane's analyses, these cases have become symbols of what federal officials now call systemic compound failures. Each offender represents not only a criminal history, but a warning about the fragile balance between civil liberties and public safety. The U.S. immigration system, with its layered procedures and long legal timelines, often prioritizes rights of due process. But when due process is combined with administrative bottlenecks, shrinking resources, and inconsistent local federal coordination, the outcome can be dangerous. For the families who live near these offenders, the revelation is deeply personal. Many never imagined that a man arrested nearly 20 times was living down the street, or that someone convicted of assaulting a child had been shopping in the same grocery store aisles. These profiles raise a painful question. How can communities feel safe if individuals with such histories can disappear into everyday life so easily? The unsettling truth now forces Florida and the nation to ask, if this many predators evaded detection for so long, what other hidden threats remain scattered across America's neighborhoods? How does a man with 19 prior arrests remain free for years? How does someone with a final deportation order from 2012 continue living in the United States for more than a decade near schools, parks, and family neighborhoods without triggering immediate enforcement? The failures revealed by Operation Dirtbag expose a deeper structural problem: an immigration enforcement system stretched thin, misaligned in priorities, and unable to keep pace with the growing complexity of criminal absconders. Between January 2021 and January 2025, U.S. immigration enforcement operated under policies that significantly narrowed the categories of individuals prioritized for arrest. Under these guidelines, only a limited pool of high-level offenders were targeted, leaving many long-term absconders, despite being registered predators or repeat criminals, effectively invisible. According to Reuters and BBC reporting from early 2025, multiple federal agencies struggled with backlogs, and removal cases often stalled for months or years due to resource shortages and shifting directives. For those already living freely in communities, this meant little oversight and even less urgency. Compounding the issue, ICE operated with approximately 6,000 deportation officers nationwide, an impossibly small number tasked with tracking and removing hundreds of thousands of individuals with active removal orders. When federal agents must choose between pursuing violent gang members, suspected terror affiliates, and long-term predators with old cases, enforcement bottlenecks are inevitable. DW and The Guardian have consistently highlighted these capacity gaps, noting that even when local authorities flagged offenders, federal manpower was often too limited for rapid response. Another failure stemmed from interagency coordination. Many offenders arrested in Operation Dirtbag had been registered with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for years, yet these records did not always translate into active federal monitoring. Local arrest data, state registries, and immigration files existed in separate bureaucratic silos, each accurate on its own, yet disconnected in practice. According to the operations briefings, a number of offenders were arrested, released on bond, failed to appear in court, and were never re-arrested because warrants lacked extradition authority. Some states issued no extradition warrants, meaning offenders could walk free simply by crossing county lines. The consequences were severe. Predators lived freely not because the system condoned it, but because the system could not absorb the workload. As Janes noted in a recent Homeland Security report, internal security blind spots accumulate when bureaucratic processes outpace enforcement capacity. These blind spots, they warned, undermine national readiness by eroding public trust and creating vulnerabilities that adversaries and criminal networks can exploit. Under President Donald Trump, the recalibration of enforcement policies sought to close those gaps. According to Defense News, the administration redirected funding toward proactive removal operations and mandated full-spectrum visibility, a policy rooted in identifying not just current offenders, but those who had been overlooked in prior years. Operation Dirtbag became the first major test of that recalibrated doctrine. Yet even with renewed federal urgency, the human impact remains sobering. Families who believed their neighborhoods were safe now confront the reality that predators were walking among them for years, attending local festivals, shopping at supermarkets, living in quiet apartment complexes. The revelation has intensified a long-standing debate in America. How can a nation protect civil liberties while ensuring that dangerous individuals cannot exploit legal safeguards to remain free? The broader strategic implications extend well beyond state lines. If Florida, one of the most aggressive enforcement states in 2025, still harbored more than 200 long-term absconders, what does that signal for regions with fewer resources? And more importantly, how many other communities across the country are relying on a system that has already proven it can fail? It began before dawn, agents moving silently through humid Florida air headlights, off radios down to a whisper. In some neighborhoods, residents awoke to the sound of armored vehicles rolling past their driveways. In others, the first sign of the operation was the sharp command of federal officers ordering a suspect to the ground. For 10 days from the Panhandle to the Keys, Florida became the stage for one of the most expansive criminal manhunts in state history. And the question reverberating through every community was simple: how could law enforcement find more than 230 dangerous offenders in just 10 days when they had been hiding for years? Operation Dirtbag, formerly called Operation Criminal Return, was executed across all 67 Florida counties with unprecedented coordination. ICE agents were joined by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and dozens of sheriff's offices, forming what officials described as an every corner, every street, every absconder strategy. The Miami field office served as the nerve center, with intelligence streams flowing in from regional task forces and state databases. Arrest teams fanned out in waves urban centers like Miami and Tampa during the night, rural counties at dawn. By the end, the operation averaged 23 arrests per day, an intensity rarely seen in statewide sweeps. What made the operation possible was not just personnel, it was information. Florida's rapid expansion of enforcement agreements in 2025 created a vast network of trained officers embedded across the state. According to Reuters and The Guardian, these partnerships allowed ICE to fuse state-level data with federal case files, creating a clearer picture of where long-term absconders were likely to be found. Some suspects were located through digital breadcrumbs, irregular address changes, outdated registrations, or abandoned court filings. Others were found through old-fashioned surveillance, watching workplaces, monitoring social hubs, tracking familiar routines. Every arrest uncovered a story. Agents found one repeat offender working quietly at a construction site, blending into a crew that saw ICE vehicles as a rare sight, not a threat. Another was discovered living near a playground, his prior convictions unknown to the families who brought their children there every evening. One suspect with multiple arrests was tracked down at an apartment complex where he had lived openly for years. These captures highlighted what DW described as the invisibility phenomenon: criminal offenders who hide not through flight but through routine. Their safety came from blending in, not running away. Operation Dirtbag's coordination was not just tactical but strategic. President Trump's Homeland Security framework emphasized rapid action, intelligence-driven enforcement, and restoring what Defense News called America's internal deterrence posture. The operation showcased that doctrine in real time. Instead of slow, case-by-case arrests, federal and state teams conducted simultaneous sweeps designed to shock the system, overwhelm absconder networks, and send a message that long-term evasion would no longer be tolerated. But the operation's success also raised uncomfortable questions about the balance between security and civil liberties. Large-scale sweeps can restore public safety, but they also test the limits of community trust. Critics warned in Al Jazeera and The Guardian coverage that aggressive enforcement risks deterring immigrant communities from reporting crimes or cooperating with investigations. Supporters countered that the operation targeted only individuals with serious criminal convictions and final deportation orders, people who had already exhausted every legal safeguard. For ordinary Floridians, the human impact was immediate. Many families felt a mix of relief and disbelief. Relief that predators had finally been removed. Disbelief that they had lived so close for so long. Parents questioned how someone with 10 or 19 arrests could blend into a neighborhood undetected. Community leaders demanded answers. Law enforcement vowed reforms. Yet the larger national question remains unresolved. If one state can uncover more than 230 dangerous offenders in 10 days, what might similar operations in other states reveal? And is the country prepared for what it might find? Before Operation Dirtbag began, most Floridians had never heard of 287G. By the end of the 10-day sweep, it had become the center of America's most heated debate over immigration enforcement. How did a little-known clause in the Immigration and Nationality Act become the engine behind one of the largest manhunts in Florida's history? And what does its rapid expansion say about the country's shifting balance between security and civil liberties? Section 287G, passed in 1996, allows ICE to deputize local police to perform federal immigration enforcement duties. For years, it remained a niche tool used sparingly, mostly inside jails. But under President Donald Trump, and especially in 2025, Florida transformed it into a statewide security framework. What had once been a paperwork mechanism became a force multiplier. According to the operations briefings, Florida's 287G network grew to 325 active agreements, a staggering 577% increase since January 2025, more than any other state in the nation. This expansion turned ordinary jail officers, sheriff's deputies, and municipal police into the first line of federal immigration identification. Defense News reported earlier this year that Trump's administration viewed 287G as the fastest path to closing internal security gaps, especially in states facing high volumes of re-entry offenders and absconders. With thousands of officers now trained under ICE supervision, Florida's enforcement capability expanded overnight. Those officers became the connective tissue that allowed Operation Dirtbag to sweep across 67 counties without collapsing under logistical strain. The program operates under 3 models: jail enforcement, officers screen individuals already in custody; warrant service officer, staff serve ICE administrative warrants in detention; task force, local police perform immigration duties during routine patrols. It was the task force model, controversial and sweeping, that made Operation Dirtbag possible on such a large scale. According to Reuters and The Guardian, this model has drawn some of the toughest scrutiny nationwide, with critics arguing it risks racial profiling and erodes trust between immigrant communities and local police. Supporters, however, claim it fills the enforcement gap that allowed dangerous predators to remain at large for years. The federal government backed this expansion with over $38 million in financial awards, including equipment, vehicles, and officer reimbursements. Nearly 4,700 Florida officers were trained and certified, giving the state what DW described as quasi-federal enforcement capacity unmatched anywhere else in the country. But with great power comes greater controversy. Civil liberties groups including the ACLU argue that 287G deputization risks mission creep local officers arresting individuals for minor infractions only to funnel them into federal detention. Al Jazeera and The Guardian have raised concerns that aggressive applications of 287G can create climates of fear, discouraging immigrants from reporting crimes or cooperating in major investigations. Florida officials counter that the fears are misguided. Operation Dirtbag focused exclusively on individuals with serious criminal convictions and long-standing removal orders. Every person arrested had already passed through the criminal justice system. Every case had been adjudicated by a federal immigration judge. Every offender had already exhausted legal pathways for remaining in the country. In the words of ICE officials, we went after the worst of the worst. The strategic implications are profound. If 287G can be scaled nationally, it could reshape the balance of domestic enforcement, shifting power away from federal bottlenecks toward decentralized state-level networks. Supporters say this strengthens America's internal security posture, bolstering deterrence and restoring rule of law credibility. Critics warn it risks blurring the lines between policing and immigration, expanding government reach in ways that future administrations could misuse. Yet Operation Dirtbag demonstrates one reality: without 287G, Florida could never have found more than 230 offenders in 10 days. The system simply didn't have the manpower before. Now with this tool, the state created an enforcement network powerful enough to reveal what had been hidden for years. This leads to a larger national question: should 287G become America's new enforcement standard, or is the country stepping into a future where security comes at the cost of trust and civil freedoms? As the final arrests were made and the operation wound down, Florida confronted a sobering truth: more than 230 dangerous offenders, predators, violent criminals, repeat felons had been living undetected in neighborhoods for years. Some had coached youth sports, worked at construction sites, or shopped casually at the same grocery stores as the people they once victimized. Now with the sweep complete, a new question emerged. What happens next, and what does Operation Dirtbag mean for the rest of America? All individuals arrested were immediately transferred into federal custody, beginning the process of removal. Many were routed to immigration detention centers across the Southeast, while others were sent to highly secure federal facilities built for long-term absconders. Among them was the newly expanded Alligator Alcatraz Detention Center, deep in the Florida Everglades, a remote fortified compound originally funded through a FEMA grant but redesigned under President Trump's administration to hold high-risk deportees. Federal officials say the center's location and security design minimize escape risk and prevent offenders from returning to populated areas. But the aftermath extends far beyond detention logistics. Operation Dirtbag has become a national test case, proving that a coordinated, intelligence-driven operation can dismantle long-standing enforcement failures. According to Reuters and DW, several states, including Texas, Arizona, and Georgia, have already begun studying Florida's model to determine whether similar sweeps might reveal hidden offender networks within their borders. Analysts from Defense News warn that states lacking Florida's 2025 surge in 287G partnerships may uncover even larger gaps. The political implications are equally profound. President Donald Trump praised the operation as evidence that aggressive enforcement restores national credibility. His administration has framed the sweep as part of a broader strategy demonstrating that America is capable of controlling its internal vulnerabilities at a time of heightened global instability. According to recent analyses from Al Jazeera and The Guardian, U.S. adversaries closely watch domestic enforcement patterns, viewing internal disorder as a sign of weakening national resolve. Operation Dirtbag therefore carries strategic weight beyond Florida. Yet, not everyone sees the outcome the same way. Immigrant advocacy groups argue that scaling Operation Dirtbag nationwide risks creating environments of fear communities where every police stop feels like a federal inspection. Critics warn that aggressive enforcement, when expanded too broadly, could erode community cooperation and blur the line between criminal justice and immigration policing. These concerns echo what BBC News recently described as a clash between security imperatives and civil liberties, a conflict that has shaped American politics for decades. Still, Operation Dirtbag forces a difficult reckoning. For years, offenders with final removal orders walked freely because of bureaucratic delays, gaps in data sharing, and a shortage of federal officers. The arrests revealed how fragile the balance between public safety and procedural fairness can be. Every case exposed in the sweep, every predator found near a school, every repeat felon hiding in an apartment complex became a reminder that the system's safeguards sometimes operate far slower than the threats they are designed to control. For families across Florida, the human impact lingers. Relief mixes with disbelief. Trust must be rebuilt. Communities demand answers how many others were missed, what new safeguards will prevent future failures, and why these offenders were allowed to remain so long. Federal officials promise reforms, tighter data integration, expanded manpower, and wider use of 287G networks. But whether these promises translate into lasting structural change remains to be seen. What is clear is that Operation Dirtbag has now set a precedent. If one state can uncover this many hidden offenders, the national implications are unavoidable. As America weighs security against liberty enforcement strength, against community trust, and domestic stability against global perception, one question now drives the debate. Is Operation Dirtbag the beginning of a new nationwide enforcement era, or a warning about how much the country still doesn't see? Operation Dirtbag revealed a hidden criminal underworld embedded throughout Florida, more than 230 offenders, including 54 convicted predators, living unnoticed in communities for years despite final deportation orders. The sweep uncovered individuals with long arrest histories, including cases involving child abuse, homicide, kidnapping, and violent assault. Many had been ordered removed more than a decade earlier, but slipped through systemic gaps caused by limited ICE manpower, shifting enforcement priorities, insufficient interagency coordination, and outdated warrant procedures. Under President Donald Trump, Florida transformed its 287G partnerships into a statewide enforcement network, expanding from a handful of agreements to more than 325, supported by over $38 million in federal funding. This infrastructure enabled a coordinated 10-day manhunt across all 67 counties, averaging 23 arrests per day. While supporters praised the operation as a restoration of public safety and national credibility, critics warn of civil liberty risks, potential community mistrust, and blurred lines between local policing and federal immigration duties. Now, with detainees transferred to secure facilities, including the fortified Alligator Alcatraz Center, states across the U.S. are debating whether to replicate the model. The operation forces a national reckoning. Is America entering a new era of aggressive internal security, or confronting the consequences of years of overlooked vulnerability